The house was exactly what I had been looking for. A quiet place in the countryside, far from the noise and stress of the city. It was a steal, too. A two-story Victorian with a wraparound porch, a massive yard, and enough space inside to feel luxurious without being excessive. I'd been searching for a fresh start, and this house practically begged me to take it. It had been sitting empty for a while, the real estate agent told me. The previous owner, an old man named Calloway, had died alone, with no direct family to claim the property. His distant relatives had no interest in keeping it, so they priced it low for a quick sale. Too many bad memories, the agent had muttered under her breath. When I pressed for details, she only shook her head. I didn't care. The house was beautiful. A little worn down, sure, but nothing I couldn't fix. The wooden floors creaked under my steps as I walked through the empty rooms, my voice echoing faintly. There was a strange, lingering smell, something like dust and damp wood, mixed with a faint, almost metallic scent. But I told myself it was just the scent of an abandoned house. A few open windows and a deep clean would fix that. As I moved in, unpacking my things, I started to notice something odd. There were no mirrors. Not in the bathrooms. Not on the closet doors. Not in the hallway, where I would have expected a decorative one. At first, I figured it was just Calloway's preference. Maybe he didn't like looking at himself. But as I searched the house, I realized something unsettling. There were spots where mirrors should have been. Empty hooks above the sinks. A square patch of wall in the hallway that was a slightly different shade, as if something had once hung there for years. It was strange, but not exactly frightening. I needed a mirror, so I brought one from my old apartment. A simple, rectangular one with a black frame. I hung it in the hallway directly across from the living room. That night, I woke up to a sound like breaking glass. Disoriented, I stumbled out of bed and turned on the hallway light. My stomach dropped. The mirror was shattered on the floor. The frame was still hanging on the wall, the nails still in place. It was as if something had punched through the glass from the inside. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I told myself it had just been a weak nail, or maybe the temperature shift caused it to break. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I cleaned up the shards, threw the frame away, and went back to bed. The next morning, I bought another mirror, a sturdier one, and placed it in the downstairs bathroom. By morning, it was broken too. This time, the door had been locked from the inside when I found it. The pieces of glass were scattered everywhere, as if something had exploded outward. My hands shook as I cleaned it up. I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was bad luck. Maybe the old house was settling in a way that weakened the walls. That evening, I called the real estate agent. "Hey," I started casually, "do you know why there weren't any mirrors in the house?" There was silence on the other end. Then, she sighed. "Look, I probably should have mentioned it, but the old man who lived there, Mr. Calloway, he had this belief." "What kind of belief?" She hesitated. "He thought mirrors were dangerous, that they weren't just reflections, but windows." I frowned. Windows to what? Another pause. Something else. My skin prickled, but I laughed it off. "Well, they keep breaking. Maybe he was onto something." The agent didn't laugh. That night I slept uneasily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection staring back at me in broken shards, its movements just a fraction too slow. And just before dawn, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of something tapping, no, scraping, against the bedroom window. The scraping against my bedroom window was slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across the glass. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound came again, long, drawn-out scratches. For a moment, I lay there, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just a tree branch in the wind. But I already knew better. There were no trees close enough to the house for that. I forced myself to sit up, pulse hammering against my ribs. The window was across the room, partially hidden by the curtains. The scraping stopped. I waited. Then, as I swung my legs over the bed and stood up, it started again. This time, faster, more frantic, like something desperate trying to claw its way in. With every muscle in my body tensed, I reached for my phone and flicked on the flashlight. The dim glow illuminated the curtain. The scraping halted instantly. I swallowed hard and took slow, careful steps forward, each one making the old wooden floor creak beneath me. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the edge of the curtain and yanked it aside. Nothing. The window was intact, no cracks, no sign of anything trying to force its way in. The outside was pitch black, the forest a looming silhouette against the night sky. I let out a shuddering breath and rubbed my face. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just on edge after the mirror's breaking. Still, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to shake off the lingering unease. I told myself I was overreacting, that an old house settling could make strange noises. But something about the way the mirror glass had broken, it wasn't natural. I decided to test a theory. I went to an antique shop in town and bought a heavy, ornate mirror. This one had a thick, gilded frame, its glass old and slightly warped, as if it had seen too much over the years. I figured if anything could withstand whatever was happening, it was this. I placed it in my bedroom directly across from my bed. A part of me hoped that waking up to my own reflection would help ease my paranoia. That night, I regretted everything. I woke up again without knowing why. The room was dark, the only light a faint sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. A suffocating stillness filled the air. And then I saw it. My reflection wasn't right. I was lying in bed, but the figure in the mirror was upright. It stood there, in the exact position I should have been in, staring directly at me. My mouth went dry. My limbs locked in place. Then slowly it raised its hand. But I didn't move. I didn't raise my own hand. It was acting on its own. I watched, paralyzed, as my reflection pressed its palm against the inside of the glass, tilting its head at an unnatural angle. Its lips curled into a slow, stretched-out smile. The glass trembled. I scrambled out of bed, my pulse roaring in my ears. The moment I moved, the reflection's face twisted into something awful. Its grin widening, teeth too sharp, eyes too black. It lunged forward, slamming its hands against the other side of the mirror. A deep, low creak filled the room, like wood bending under pressure. The glass warped as if something was trying to force its way through. I didn't think. I grabbed the closest thing I could, my bedside lamp, and hurled it at the mirror. The impact shattered the glass, shards exploding outward, some slicing my arms. The sound was deafening. The room plunged into darkness. But for a split second, just as the mirror shattered, I saw something behind the glass. A pale, distorted face, wide black eyes locked onto mine. Its mouth was still stretched into that unnatural smile. And then it was gone. I stood there, chest heaving, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. The air was thick with something wrong. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had made my decision. I was leaving. But as I packed, I made one mistake. I checked my reflection in the window, and it was still smiling. My stomach dropped as I stared at my reflection in the window. I wasn't smiling. My lips were pressed into a thin, bloodless line, my face pale with exhaustion. But the figure in the glass, it was grinning, wide stretched too far, its teeth just slightly too sharp. I jerked away from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the house immediately, but my body refused to move. I forced myself to look again, but this time my reflection was normal. Had I imagined it? I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. My hands shook as I zipped up my suitcase, throwing in the last of my clothes. I didn't care if I left things behind. I just needed to get out. I grabbed my car keys and rushed downstairs. The house was eerily silent, the floorboards groaning under my hurried steps. I had the front door in my sights, my escape just feet away. Then something slammed shut behind me. The armoire. The massive, antique armoire in the hallway, one of the few pieces of furniture that had belonged to Calloway. I had never even opened it. It had always just been there, an unmoving relic of the past. But now it was rattling. The doors shook violently, as if something inside was desperate to get out. A dull, rhythmic thudding echoed from within, a sickening, unnatural sound. Thud, thud, thud. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering against my skull. The doors bulged outward slightly, the wood groaning as if under immense pressure. And then, the doors burst open. For a moment, there was nothing but blackness inside. A gaping, endless void where the back of the armoire should have been. The darkness twisted, shifted, something writhing deep within it. And then I saw them. Hands. Pale, emaciated hands, fingers elongated and wrong, clawing their way out of the void. And beneath them, a face. A distorted, hollow version of my own. Its eyes black pits. Its mouth splitting into that same terrible, impossible smile. It reached for me. I turned and ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe. I just ran for the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock. My vision swimming as I yanked it open. Cold night air hit me like a slap, and I stumbled out onto the porch, barely catching myself before falling down the steps. The door slammed shut behind me. For a long time, I just stood there, panting, my heart threatening to beat out of my chest. And then, slowly, the house grew quiet again. The wind rustled through the trees, the stars shining indifferent above me. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I took one last look at the house that had felt so perfect when I first bought it, the house that had been waiting for me. Then I got in my car and drove away. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the sun rising on the horizon, burning away the last remnants of the nightmare. I never went back. I never sold the house. I never told anyone what happened. But sometimes when I walk past a mirror, I swear, for just a split second, I see myself smiling, but I'm not. I was desperate when I moved into that apartment. The rent was dirt cheap, and for a one-bedroom in a decent part of town, it almost seemed too good to be true. The building was old. Sure, with creaky floors and walls thin enough to hear my neighbors arguing at night, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to start over. The landlord was an odd man, thin, wiry, with darting eyes that never quite met mine. As I signed the lease, he cleared his throat and muttered, "Just so you know, the floors creak a little more than usual in this unit." I laughed. "No problem. I like old buildings." He didn't laugh. The first few days were fine. The place had a weird smell, kind of musty like old books and something faintly metallic, but I figured it was just years of dust and neglect. I set up my furniture, got used to the occasional cockroach, and ignored the strange groaning sounds the pipes made at night. But then I noticed something strange. The floor. It was soft. Not everywhere, just certain spots, mainly in the living room. When I walked over them, the wood felt like it had a slight give, almost as if there was something underneath. Not like loose boards, but something pressing back. I tried not to think about it. Then, a few nights later, I heard something. I had been dozing off when a faint sound reached my ears. A whisper. My name. It was so quiet, so barely there, that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. But then it came again. A slow, rasping voice from under the floor. I shot up in bed, my body rigid with fear. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the pipes, or my neighbors, or a dream I hadn't fully shaken off. But deep down, I knew better. I barely slept that night, every little sound setting my nerves on edge. The next day, I inspected the living room floor carefully, pressing my foot down on the spots that felt soft. The wood shifted just slightly, as if there was something underneath, something moving. I decided to ignore it. I needed to ignore it. But that night, as I lay in bed, the whisper came again. Only this time it wasn't just my name. "Let me out." A chill ran through me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "Please, let me out." The voice was clearer now, as if whoever or whatever it was had risen closer to the surface. My stomach twisted as a horrible realization crept into my mind. The voice wasn't coming from under the floor. It was coming from inside it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice had stopped. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. My body was stiff, every muscle locked in place, my ears straining for any hint of sound. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just exhausted. Then a soft thump. A muffled, rhythmic tapping from the living room. I gripped my blanket, heart hammering, my brain scrambling for a rational explanation. Pipes expanding? The neighbors downstairs? My own paranoia? But deep down, I knew none of those were true. Slowly, I forced myself out of bed. My feet barely made a sound on the old wood as I crept toward the living room. The tapping continued, steady, deliberate, coming from the center of the floor. I turned on the lamp, my fingers ice-cold around the switch. The dim yellow glow spread across the room. Everything looked normal. My couch, my coffee table, the stack of books I had left out. But then the floor moved. Not much, just a slight, almost imperceptible shift, like something underneath had pressed against it for a fraction of a second. I staggered back, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This isn't happening. This isn't real. Then a voice. I know you can hear me. I let out a strangled gasp, every hair on my body standing on end. The voice was clearer now, the tone eerily calm. It was right beneath me. I forced myself to move, to back away slowly, never taking my eyes off the floor. I grabbed my phone from the counter, my fingers shaking as I pulled up my landlord's number. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. A sharp crack echoed through the room. I looked down just in time to see a thin, jagged split forming in one of the floorboards. I ran. I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on every light, and sat in the bathtub, my back pressed against the cold tile. For the rest of the night, I heard scraping, fingernails dragging against wood. I didn't sleep. I sat in the bathtub, knees drawn to my chest, listening to the relentless scraping from the living room. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, unhurried, like whoever or whatever was beneath the floor knew I had nowhere to go. By the time the sun rose, the noise had stopped. I forced myself out of the bathroom, every step cautious, my body tense. The living room looked the same, almost. The floor was still intact, but there was something different about it. The soft spots were worse. They stretched wider now, covering more of the room. I pressed down gently with my foot. The wood gave, sagging slightly beneath my weight. Like something underneath was shifting. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my keys and made my way to the front door, my pulse racing. Just as I reached for the knob, my phone rang, the sudden noise shattering the silence. I fumbled to answer it. Hello, I breathed. A long pause. Then, did you hear them? I nearly dropped the phone. It was my landlord. My mouth went dry. What? A heavy sigh crackled through the line. You heard them, didn't you? I swallowed hard. Who? Another pause. Then, in a voice so low I barely caught it. The ones in the floor. I felt sick. I need to get out of here, I said, my voice shaking. There's something wrong with this place. He exhaled sharply. Listen to me, he said. Do not tear up the floor. Do not pry it open. No matter what happens, do not let them out. I felt lightheaded, my grip tightening around the phone. What the hell is under there? Silence. Then, just before the call cut off, they were here before the building. The line went dead. I stood there, heart hammering, the dial tone ringing in my ears. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind. But my body wouldn't move, because at that moment, a single whisper drifted up from the floor. Please. Just a little crack. I dropped the phone. My legs locked, my breath caught in my throat. The whisper had been so close. Too close. The floor beneath my feet suddenly felt thinner, like I was standing on nothing but stretched fabric, something breathing just inches below. I had to get out. I turned, gripping the doorknob so hard my knuckles turned white. It wouldn't budge. I yanked harder. The lock wasn't stuck. The door itself wouldn't move, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. The air in the apartment changed, thickened. A faint hum vibrated through the walls, through the floor. And then, the wood groaned. Right in the center of the living room, the floor bulged. Not a slow bend, not like settling house beams. It rose, like something was pushing up from underneath. I backed away, my pulse roaring in my ears. Another whisper. Just let me out. The floor split. Just an inch. It was enough. I saw fingers. Thin, pale, too long. They curled up through the crack in the wood, twisting like a spider's legs. Reaching, I let out a strangled cry and grabbed the closest thing I could find. A metal floor lamp. Without thinking, I raised it high and slammed it down onto the fingers. A wet, sickening crunch. The thing in the floor screamed. Not a normal scream. Not human. It was a layered, warped sound, like dozens of voices overlapping, shrieking in agony. The floor convulsed, the entire apartment shuddering as the bulging wood slammed back down. The fingers disappeared, vanishing into the darkness below. Then silence. My breath came in short gasps. The apartment was still. The air felt lighter. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, nothing else. This time, the door opened with ease. I ran. I never went back for my things. I never asked for my deposit back. I didn't want any connection to that place. I don't know who lives there now, but sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, when the lights are off and the night is too quiet, I hear it, fingernails scraping against wood. When my grandfather passed away, he left me his house. It wasn't unexpected. He had no children besides my mother, and she had no interest in it. So the house became mine. It was a quiet, two-story home on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that felt frozen in time. Dusty old furniture, yellowed wallpaper, and the scent of old wood that never quite went away. I remembered visiting as a child. There had always been something off about the house, but I couldn't place why. It wasn't until I moved in that I realized it. There was a room that kept disappearing. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. The house had 3 bedrooms upstairs, including the master. But on my second night, I went to put some boxes in the spare room and found a blank wall. No door. No sign there had ever been a door. I froze. The room had been there yesterday. I had seen it, walked inside it. The old wardrobe, the wooden desk. It had all been there. Now, nothing. Just an unbroken stretch of wallpaper. I pressed my hands against the wall, feeling for any seams or hidden panels. Solid, like the door had never existed. I backed away, my skin crawling. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe I had miscounted the rooms. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. And that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard something, a faint scratching, coming from inside the wall. The scratching continued all night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense. The sound wasn't loud, but it was constant, like something behind the wall was moving, scraping, clawing. I told myself it had to be mice or rats. Maybe the house had a pest problem that my grandfather never took care of. But something about the noise unsettled me. It sounded deliberate. By morning, the sound had stopped. I forced myself to get up, my head pounding from lack of sleep. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the events of the previous night feel distant. Almost unreal. Almost. I walked down the hallway, stopping in front of the missing room. The wall was still solid. No door. No sign it had ever been there. But as I ran my fingers along the wallpaper, I swore I could feel something. Hollow. I knocked lightly. Hollow. I knocked again, harder this time. A knock came back. I stumbled away, my breath catching in my throat. My pulse thundered in my ears. I hadn't imagined it. Something inside the wall had knocked back. I turned and left the hallway, trying to convince myself that it was just a trick of sound. Maybe an old pipe shifting or wood settling. But deep down, I didn't believe that, because that night, as I lay in bed, the scratching returned. Only this time it was louder, and then, sometime past midnight, I heard a voice, low, raspy, right behind the wall. Let me out. I didn't sleep. The voice had been faint, almost a whisper, but I had heard it, clear as day. Let me out. I stayed in bed, my body stiff, my mind racing. I wanted to believe I had imagined it. That exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. When morning came, I forced myself to check the hallway again. The wall was still there. The room was still gone. I stared at the blank wallpaper, my skin crawling. I tried to remember what had been inside before it disappeared. The old wooden wardrobe, a dusty desk, a chair tucked neatly in the corner. None of it was there now, but something was, something inside. The day passed in a blur. I spent most of it out of the house, walking through town, trying to push the thoughts away. But even in the open air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night, I left every light on. It didn't help. The scratching returned, sharper than before. More frantic, more desperate. And then the voice, louder this time. Let me out. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox my grandfather had left behind. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. I had to know. I had to see. I walked to the wall, gripping the hammer so tightly my fingers ached. My breath came in shallow gasps as I raised it high and swung. The first hit sent a dull thud through the house. The wallpaper tore, revealing the wood underneath. The second hit splintered the wood. The third broke through. And the moment the hole appeared, something breathed from the other side. The breath from the other side of the wall sent a wave of cold air rushing over me. Not just a draft, it was something else. Something that felt alive. I staggered back, my heart hammering. The hole in the wall was small, jagged, barely big enough to see through. The darkness inside was absolute. Even with the hallway lights on, the space beyond swallowed everything. I swallowed hard and stepped forward, pressing my eye to the opening. First, I saw nothing, just blackness. Then movement, a slow shift deeper in the void. Something was inside. I yanked back, every nerve in my body screaming to run. But my body refused to move. My hands felt numb, my legs like lead. Knock! Knock! The sound came from inside the hole, two slow, deliberate knocks. I dropped the hammer. The sound shouldn't have been possible. I had broken the wall open. If the room was still there, I should have been able to see it. Instead, it was like I had punched through into something else. Something that shouldn't exist. The air around me grew heavy, like I was standing at the bottom of a deep ocean. My ears rang, a high-pitched, suffocating whine that made my vision blur. And then, a hand shot through the hole. Pale, thin, fingers too long. I screamed and stumbled back as the hand clawed at the edges of the hole, peeling away the wallpaper, the wooden slats beneath splintering like old bone. The hole widened. The hand was followed by another, then another, then another. Too many. I ran. I tore down the hallway, down the stairs, my foot catching on the last step. I hit the floor hard, pain shooting up my side, but I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. Behind me, I heard the wood groaning. The wall was breaking apart. Something was coming through. The lock finally gave. I yanked the door open and stumbled outside, the night air hitting me like ice. I didn't stop running. Not until I was in my car, speeding down the road, my house shrinking in the rearview mirror. I didn't go back. I never went back. The next day, I called a contractor, pretending I needed an estimate for renovations. I gave him the address, told him to check the upstairs. He was only in the house for 5 minutes. Then he called me, his voice shaky. "There's no extra room," he said. "Just 2 bedrooms. And the hallway." I felt sick. "But there used to be 3. A long pause. "The wall you're talking about?" We checked. "The solid. There's nothing behind it. Just foundation." I hung up without another word. I tried to forget. I moved across the country, told myself it had been my imagination, that I had hallucinated the voice, the hands, the shifting walls. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment late at night, I hear it, faint, beneath the floor, beneath the walls, scratching, knocking, and a whisper, "Let me out." The moment I stepped into that house, something felt wrong. It wasn't anything obvious. The place was beautiful, an old Victorian-style home, tucked away on a quiet street. The price was low, almost suspiciously so, but I didn't care. I had been looking for a fresh start, and this house felt like a good place to begin. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, cleaning, getting used to the creaks and groans of an old house settling. But then, little things started happening. Small, strange things. I woke up one morning and noticed that my fingernails were longer. Not just a little, a lot. As if I hadn't cut them in weeks. I frowned, rubbing my hands together. Maybe I had just forgotten to trim them. But the next morning, they were even longer. By the end of the week, they were too long. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. I had trimmed my nails just yesterday, and now they had grown back twice as fast. The unease in my stomach deepened when I looked in the mirror. There was something off about my reflection. The dark circles under my eyes were heavier. My face looked older, as if I hadn't slept in days. I shook it off, blaming stress and bad lighting. But then the changes became impossible to ignore. One morning, I found gray hairs mixed into my beard. My nails weren't just growing fast, they were thicker, almost unnatural. The lines on my face had deepened overnight. I checked my phone, scrolling through recent pictures of myself. I didn't look like this a month ago. I didn't even look like this last week. Something was changing me, and it was getting worse. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I had the same dream. I was standing in front of the house, but it wasn't mine. The paint was peeling, the wood rotting, the windows black and empty. I could feel something watching me from inside. Something waiting. Each night, the dream lasted longer. Each night, I took a step closer to the door. And every morning, I woke up older. The gray in my beard spread. My hairline crept back. My nails weren't just growing. They were thickening, hardening, curling like claws. It didn't make sense. I went to a doctor, but all my tests came back normal. Just stress, they said. But I could see it in their faces. The way they glanced at me, at the deep wrinkles around my eyes, at the unnatural speed of my hair growth. They knew something was wrong. And it wasn't just me. The house itself was changing. Rooms didn't feel the same size as before. The windows looked slightly warped, like the glass had melted just a little. The wooden floors seemed darker than when I moved in. The whole place felt alive. Then one night I woke up outside. The cold air jolted me awake. I was standing on the front porch, my bare feet freezing against the wood. The door behind me was open. Had I sleepwalked? I had never done that before. My hands were shaking as I stepped inside. The house was silent. Too silent. Then I saw it. A framed photograph sitting on the hallway table. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up with trembling hands. The picture was old, black and white. A man stood in front of the house, looking directly at the camera. He looked just like me. The man in the photograph was me. Or at least he looked like me. His face was gaunt, his beard thick and unkempt, his eyes sunken and hollow. He stood in front of my house, but everything about the picture was old. The edges yellowed, the ink slightly faded. The man's clothes were outdated, something from another time. I turned the frame over. There was a date scrawled on the back. 1923. I dropped the photo, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. It wasn't possible. I ran to my bedroom, flipped on the light, and stared at myself in the mirror. The changes were worse. My face was thinner than it had been yesterday, my skin slightly sagging, as if I had aged years overnight. My fingernails had grown even longer, curling slightly at the edges. My hair, once dark, was streaked with more gray. I ran my hands over my face, feeling the roughness of my skin, the sharpness of my cheekbones. The house was changing me. I had to leave. Now, I threw open my closet and grabbed the nearest suitcase, stuffing clothes inside without bothering to fold them. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold onto my things. Then I heard the floor creak, right outside my bedroom door. I froze, gripping the suitcase handle so tightly my knuckles went white. Another creak, closer this time. I turned toward the door, my pulse hammering. The house was silent, but I knew I wasn't alone. I stepped forward, inching toward the door. Slowly, carefully, I reached out and turned the knob. The hallway was empty. But the photograph was gone. The table where it had been sitting was bare. No frame. No trace that it had ever been there. And then, footsteps. Above me. Coming from the attic. I had never been to the attic. The pull-down ladder was in the hallway ceiling, just a few feet away. I had never even checked to see what was up there. The footsteps were slow, steady, pacing. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But something deep inside me whispered, "It's waiting for you." I reached up with a shaking hand and tugged the ladder down. It unfolded with a groan, the hinges stiff from years of disuse. A musty, stale smell wafted from the darkness above. I climbed. Each step felt heavier, like the house was pulling me in. The air grew colder the higher I went. The attic was dark, the only light coming from a small, round window on the far wall. Then I saw them. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Scattered across the attic floor, tacked onto the walls, stacked in boxes. Every single one was a picture of me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The photos weren't just from today or last week. They stretched back decades. The clothing changed, the hairstyles, the quality of the photographs. But the face was always mine. In one, I stood in front of the house just like the 1923 photo. In another, I was sitting on the porch, my beard streaked with gray. In another, I was inside the house, staring out from a second-floor window. And then, at the very back of the attic, I saw it, a mirror, large, cracked, leaning against the far wall. The glass was clouded, warped, as if the image inside had been distorted. But when I stepped closer, my reflection wasn't just distorted. It was wrong. The thing in the mirror was me, but older, much older. My face was skeletal, my skin dry and cracked like ancient paper. My eyes were sunken, black pits. My lips pulled back in a rictus grin. And then, it moved. Not like a reflection. It moved before I did. It raised a shaking hand. I took a step back. Took a step forward. I stumbled, my foot crunching on old paper. The photographs scattered beneath me, my own face staring up from the floor. In the mirror, the old version of me took another step forward and pressed its hands against the glass. The mirror began to ripple. I ran. I nearly fell down the attic ladder, my hands shaking too badly to grip the rungs. I hit the hallway floor hard and scrambled to my feet, racing down the stairs. The house felt different. The walls seemed taller, stretching unnaturally toward the ceiling. The wooden floorboards were darker, warped, the entire house pulsing like a living thing. I reached the front door and yanked it open. The hallway continued. My breath caught in my throat. The front door should have led outside. But now it opened to another hallway, identical to the one behind me. Same wallpaper, same wooden floor, same dim lighting. I turned, heart pounding, and opened the nearest door. A bedroom. My bedroom. I slammed it shut and ran down the endless hallway, my bare feet slapping against the warped wood. Door after door, I flung them open. Every single one led back inside the house. I wasn't in my world anymore. I was in its. Then, from behind me I heard it, a slow creak, like an old man rising to his feet. I turned. At the far end of the hallway, a shadow stepped forward. Tall, thin. Its skin sagged, loose and wrinkled, hanging from its skeletal frame like melted wax. The face was mine, aged beyond recognition. Sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, a mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile once but had stretched too far. It raised a trembling hand and beckoned. A whisper filled the air, not from its mouth but from the walls, from the floor, from the house itself. Come back home. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know if there was a way out, but I ran anyway. The air grew thicker as I sprinted down the endless hallways, my lungs burning. The walls pulsed, the wood groaning beneath my feet. I could hear the thing behind me, its slow, steady footsteps, not running, just walking, because it knew I couldn't leave. I reached another door, wrenched it open, and this time I saw daylight. The street, my car, the outside world. I threw myself forward, falling through the doorway, and landed hard on my front porch. I gasped for air, scrambling to my feet. The house behind me was silent. The hallway was gone. The door was just a door. I backed away, my body trembling. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house looked normal, like nothing had ever happened. But when I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A framed photograph, sitting on the porch railing. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was me, standing in front of the house, 100 years older, and smiling. I lived alone, always had. That was the first thing I told myself when the strange things started happening. The first time it was small. A door left slightly open when I was sure I had closed it. Then it was something else. A mug in the sink that I didn't use. A light on that I knew I had turned off. First, I brushed it off. I was busy, stressed. Maybe I was just forgetting things. Then I heard footsteps. They came late at night, faint but unmistakable. I would be lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, and suddenly, I'd hear them, soft, deliberate, just outside my bedroom door. I would hold my breath, listening. Nothing. When I worked up the nerve to check, the apartment would be empty. The doors still locked. Still, I convinced myself it was my imagination. Until the plate appeared. I woke up one morning and went into the kitchen, still half asleep. And there, sitting on the counter, was a plate. It wasn't just a plate. There were two plates. One was clean. The other had bits of food on it. Eggs, toast. Something that had been half-eaten. I hadn't cooked anything. I hadn't used two plates. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my phone and checked the security app for my cameras. I had one by the front door and another in the living room. I scrolled through the footage from the night before. Nothing. The footage showed me going to bed. The apartment sat still and silent for the rest of the night. No movement. No one else. And yet, there were two plates. I stood in my kitchen, the early morning light filtering through the blinds, staring at the proof that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the plate. It wasn't just the fact that it was there, it was the implication. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had eaten here, and I had no idea who or how. My doors were locked. My windows were shut. My cameras showed nothing. But the plate was here, undeniable, sitting on my counter like a message I wasn't meant to ignore. I took slow, careful steps toward it, half expecting it to disappear the moment I blinked. I reached out and touched it. The ceramic was cold. Whoever had used it had done so hours ago. I needed answers. I grabbed the plate and dumped it in the sink, turning on the faucet to rinse away the evidence. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I had gotten up in the middle of the night, cooked myself a meal, and completely forgotten. But as I scrubbed the plate, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Another fork, sitting in the drying rack. I hadn't used two forks. I hadn't used any forks. The realization sent a jolt of panic through me. I backed away from the sink, my breath coming in shallow gasps. There was no logical explanation for this. No way I could have done this to myself. Which meant someone else had. I grabbed my phone and opened my security app again, scrolling through the footage one more time. I scrubbed through the timeline, watching the empty apartment sit in silence. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. No sign of anyone entering or leaving. I checked the front door. Still locked. I checked the windows. Still closed. I checked the closets. The bathroom. The laundry room. Nothing. I was alone. So why didn't it feel like it? That night I set up another camera. This one, I placed in the kitchen, angled toward the counter where the plate had been. If someone or something was moving around my apartment while I slept, I would catch them. I barely slept that night. Every little noise made my skin crawl. The hum of the fridge. The distant sound of cars passing outside. The soft creaks of the old wooden floors. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up, the apartment was quiet. Morning light filtered through the blinds. Everything looked normal. But then I saw it. The coffee cup, sitting on the counter. Full. Still warm. A tremor ran through me. I hadn't made coffee. I stepped closer, staring down at the steaming liquid. It was black just the way I drank it. There was even a faint indentation on the rim, as if someone had already taken a sip. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I opened the security app and clicked on the footage from last night. My stomach twisted into knots as I scrolled to 3 a.m. And then movement. Someone was in the kitchen. But I wasn't. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the footage. The camera had picked up something. A blurry figure, a shape, standing in the darkness. It wasn't fully visible. The distortion around it made my head ache just looking at it, like the camera itself was struggling to register what it was seeing. The figure stood by the counter for hours. Not moving. Not eating. Not doing anything. Just standing there. Watching. And then, at 5:12 a.m. it was gone. The footage skipped, just a single frame missing. And in the next second, the kitchen was empty again. The coffee cup was on the counter. Still warm. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. I had proof. But proof of what? Something was in my apartment. Something I couldn't see. Something my cameras refused to capture. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't leave my apartment. I barely even moved. I just sat at my desk, staring at the footage over and over again, trying to find some rational explanation. There was none. By evening, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I didn't care if I had to break my lease, if I had to spend every last dollar I had on a new place. I was getting out. I packed a bag, throwing in only the essentials, clothes, my laptop, my phone charger. I didn't need much. I just needed to be somewhere else. As I zipped up my bag, I felt it again. That strange, prickling sensation. I wasn't alone. I turned my head, my pulse spiking. The closet door was open. Just an inch. Just enough to see the darkness inside. I hadn't opened it. I took a slow step back, my entire body rigid with fear. The air in the apartment felt thick, heavy, like the pressure had changed. Then, from inside the closet, a breath, shallow, ragged, too close. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I didn't even look behind me as I threw open the front door and stumbled into the hallway. My neighbors gave me strange looks as I sprinted down the corridor, my heart hammering. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the doors locked, my chest heaving. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing mind. I needed to go back. Just once. Just to grab the rest of my things. I told myself I'd bring friends. That I wouldn't go alone. But the moment I pulled out my phone to call someone, I saw it. A notification. My security camera had detected motion. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Someone was inside my apartment. Slowly, I tapped the notification and opened the live feed. At first, I didn't see anything. The living room looked normal. The kitchen was empty. But then, the closet door swung open. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched the footage. A shadow stepped out. It wasn't fully visible. The distortion around it made my head ache just like before. But it was there. It knew I was watching. And then, it turned its head toward the camera. The moment it did, the screen cut to static. My hands were shaking as I tried to reload the feed. Nothing. The cameras were offline. And then, a new notification. A text message. From my own number. I opened it with numb fingers. There was no text. No subject. Just a single image attachment. I tapped it. The picture loaded slowly. It was my apartment. The inside of my living room. Taken from the couch. Where I should have been sitting. Where someone else was sitting instead. Watching me leave.